session 3 of our Marine Litter Fortnight. We started off with the Marine Conservation Society on Monday, a really uplifting talk that we had that really set the scene for these 2 weeks of discussion. We then moved across onto a more localised kind of case study, if you like, with Greener Orkney, and hopefully John's on our call again today. So thank you very much for taking us through some of the stats and making us understand what the picture was like specific to Orkney, but also some of the outer isles as well. So today we've got Dr. Tom Stanton from Loughborough University, who's going to enlighten us. And then into next week, we have our in-person workshop tour of the Green High Plastic Workshop in Nairn on Tuesday, followed up by Caithness Beach Cleans next week on the 6th, and following up on the 7th with community networking, we called it, but what we really want to do is bring together some of the learning, some of the actions, and follow on that conversation about really what can we do now, what are those first steps, and what are those collective actions that we can maybe take as a network. So that will round up the fortnight next week. So for anyone who's not aware of who we are as the Hub, so the Highlands and Islands Climate Hub covers the Highlands and Islands. We have 6 development staff that cover a broad geographical area, including development staff on Shetland and on Orkney. If you haven't yet met your local development officer, then please do get in touch and we'll make sure that we make that connection. So the Hub is here to support community climate action. What do we mean by that? This is about community action and community needs coming together and making climate action. So here's an example of some of the projects that we get involved in, working with community groups, with community councils, or with really inspiring individuals that are looking to make a difference in their localities. We recognise that while funding is not the priority for everyone here, sometimes funding is required. We have the Climate Action Fund, which is a seed funding approach that is taken on a month-by-month basis. At the moment, it's up to £1,000. So if you have a project that you're looking to start, if you have a project that you just need a little bit of funding to nudge in the right direction, or you require the funding so that you can match fund this project, then please do get in touch. The Sustainable Spaces programme is around community facilities transitioning to net zero. So if you have a community facility that you're looking to make changes to, if you're looking for retrofitting advice, if you're needing some support with some of the policies required for some of the larger funding pots, then please do again get in touch with us and we'll support you on that journey. If you serve food or have a food related project as part of your organisation, then we also offer the food hygiene certificates. You need to be a member of Highlands and Islands Climate Hub, so if you're not already, we do encourage people to sign up. Membership is free. As part of that, you will get access to a development officer, but you will also get monthly funder finders straight into your inbox, which will detail any funding streams that may be applicable to your project. We're also looking ahead, and next year's obviously going to be a big year within Scottish politics, and we really want to be that collective voice to the Scottish Government on behalf of community groups and climate action in the Highlands and Islands. So, enough about us, we're going to move on. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Tom Stanton. Hopefully that's you back now. I'll hand over to you, Tom, if you're happy to do the introductions and take it away from there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fiona. I think the first thing I need to say is apologies, occupational hazard. I have been hit by freshers flu, so I think I've just about got over it, but I'm lingering with it. I've got a cough lingering, so please do bear with me if I need to pause. But yeah, thanks everyone. It's really good to see you all and to be able to speak to you today. about some of the work that I'm doing. Um, I'm Tom Stanton. I've come from Loughborough University, and I'm going to talk to you today about my experiences of integrating community groups into my team's research on marine litter across the west coast of Scotland, but particularly focused on the Isle of Skye. Excuse me. I really want to stress first and foremost that this is a team effort. I'm just one person from a big group, um, representing several Midlands-based universities. So a quick introduction to who I am. I'm a lecturer in geography at Loughborough University, and my research area is focused on aquatic pollution and community science. So how we can kind of explore our understanding of the polluting impacts that we have on aquatic spaces, coastal, marine, and freshwater, but do that with different community groups as well. I do have a specialism in material pollution. I work a bit in chemical pollution, but most of my work is focused on materials in the environment. Very deliberately don't put plastic pollution here. Some of the early work that I did, for example, was looking at natural textile fibers like cotton and wool and their role as pollutants alongside plastic alternatives. So I suppose the main focus of a lot of what I do is making sure that the sustainable material narratives that we are promoting are appropriately informed, and that requires us to think beyond just plastic. Not to say plastic is not a problem, of course. But why am I talking to you today as an academic from the English Midlands about marine litter on the west coast of Scotland? Well, I am project lead for 4 projects in this space: 50 Years of Litter on Skye, Siobhulach, Isle of Skye, and Karma. And that's the work that I'm going to start talking about today. Why did I start all of this work? Well, I actually read a paper when I was a master's student, 9 years ago now. And that was this paper here, written by Professor Gerald Scott, formerly of Aston University, who came and wrote this piece of work, I think whilst he was on holiday, documenting the presence of marine litter on 2 remote beaches on the Elgol Peninsula on Skye, an absolutely stunning spot if you haven't been. I was drawn to this paper first because it's the first piece of literature that I had found that talks about the role of the marine environment as a source of the litter that washes up on beaches. And I want to really stress here that it's the first academic reference to this. I know that anyone who lives on these shorelines, visits these shorelines, won't need to spend too long on there to work that out, but this is the first time that it kind of got into the realm of academic literature. And I was really drawn to this paragraph in particular that refers to taking surveys on 2 inaccessible stretches of shoreline in northern Scotland that were cut off from the casual visitor by natural barriers and required a measure of climbing ability that would exclude the picnicking public. So as a master's student, I was thinking, how cool would it be to go back and scramble for science? And eventually I managed to get some funding to do that. So in 2022, right at the end of that year, myself and some colleagues were awarded £5,000 by the Sea Changes Innovation Fund for our 50 Years of Litter on Skye project. Initially, the idea of this project was to just go and characterize and quantify marine litter on the beaches around Skye, including the ones that Scott went to. It was very much a quantitative exercise. It was, let's get some data, publish a paper, and we'll see what happens afterwards. The project kicked off in January 2023, and we had our first field work in July of the same year. And we realised that we needed to have some conversations with people on Skye, of course, to work out where we needed to go, what permissions we needed, what the reality of the issue might be. So I reached out to to several local environmental groups and had some amazing conversations. And this kind of phase of the project I've affectionately referred to as from teams to transects, because these conversations really transformed our approach. They helped us realize, or made us realize, that there was a lot more complex a story to tell than just counting pieces of litter on the beach, and highlighted the kind of the value of local insights into this issue, which kind of went way beyond the theory that we were trying to apply in our environmental understanding of this particular landscape. So from those initial conversations, I started to have some more structured conversations with people from these different environmental groups, and they revolved around oh no, I've gone too far. Sorry, apologies. There was a lag in my computer screen there. they revolved around these core research questions, I suppose. How much litter is there on Skye's beaches? How has that litter changed over time? Whereabouts is the litter found and where is it coming from? And is there anything that people living on Skye want us to know about the marine litter that we are hoping to survey? So these four questions really guided and shaped the research that we actually eventually undertook in that first field season, and ultimately all of the work we have done since. So why is litter on Scotland's west coast so important? I want to share this map with you. So this is a map of the OSPAR Commission's maritime regions. And the OSPAR Commission oversee a lot of the legislative monitoring of marine litter around European waters. Each of these little green dots represents one of their survey sites, one of the places that they go and monitor this litter. And you'll notice that the west coast of Scotland is currently pretty much completely void of any monitoring. So this is an area where there is no monitoring that's feeding into the international campaigns that ultimately guide legislation about where to sort of focus intervention points to minimize marine litter washing up on beaches, and in so doing also having this marine litter out at sea. So that's why the west coast of Scotland is so important. But when we actually want to go and measure and quantify beach litter in these sites, how do we actually go about doing it? Well, there's lots of different ways around the world to do this. And in Europe, anyone following the OSPAR guidelines, excuse me, are required to basically survey 100 meters of shoreline, starting at the last high water mark, walking along the beach, making their way further up towards the back of the beach, and recording the pieces of litter that they find on the way, following the OSPAR guidelines that were published in 2010. This is the standard, and according to some, the gold standard approach to marine litter surveying in excuse me, along the European coastline. There is obviously a big question though: what if you have a beach that's less than 100 meters? 100 meters is sort of the preferred length. It's one of the required characteristics of beaches that are included in the OSPAR guidelines. There has since been a recent update to allow beaches that are 50 meters in length or width, depending on how you want to frame it. But the core thing here is that there's an expectation to standardize your reporting to 100 meters of beach, and that is or can be a real sticking point. These the data that are collected during these surveys are recorded on lots of different forms, and in our surveys we use these forms here. So this is just a 2-page sort of condensed version of the categories in the OSPAR Commission's forms. What we found very quickly, though, from those conversations that we were having, is that a 100-meter survey would just not be possible. There was no way that we were going to be able to do this, either because the length of the beaches was too narrow, too thin. We didn't have 100 meters of beach, or the sheer amount of litter that was on these shorelines was too great. And so we developed with the community partners that we were originally involved with a method that would enable us to survey smaller subsections of beach, and we essentially followed a transect methodology. So rather than doing 100 meters of beach, we did as many 10-meter transects as we could. And just for our own organization, we broke those transects down into 10-meter square boxes. Some of our beaches, we only managed to survey 10 meters of beach. The most beach we ever managed to survey was 80 meters. But by breaking it down into these survey transects and distributing them unevenly across the beach, we can also look at variation in litter across the beach. So I just want to very quickly summarize the kind of the headline findings of that first year of survey work. We went to 9 sites and we surveyed 13,909 items in that first field season, and we removed about a ton and a half of litter. Sorry. First of all, in that year, I want to just provide a little bit of UK national context. Across the UK, when we standardise beach litter or standardised beach litter to a number of pieces per 100 metres, on average, there were 309 pieces of litter per 100 metres of beach. The survey work that we did across our 9 beaches returned figures of 3,751 pieces of litter per 100 metres. So we can see straight away that there is an order of magnitude more litter on the beaches that we surveyed compared to the UK average, really driving home the amount of litter that is on some of these beaches on Skye, and that subsequent conversations have shown are also true, or also hold true of other sites across the west coast of Scotland. But this is only the kind of the surface level data, because in some places we did some really quite detailed surface level surveys on a much smaller scale. And this is an example of one of our sites at Camasunary, where we measured out 1 metre squared and we recorded every single piece of litter that fell within that 1 metre squared. And when we did this, we found that we got up to 1,051 pieces of litter per metre squared. Now, obviously, this is in a localized area of a beach. It can't be generalized or extrapolated over a larger area, but it highlights the sheer number of pieces of litter that can be found on some of these beaches that are not feeding into those international data sets, and as a result are not informing international level policy and legislation. So after this 2023 field season, we had a brilliant data set. We learned a lot. We could have stopped there. We could have just written the data up, published it, and moved on. But quite frankly, we were so touched by the way that we were welcomed by the people on Skye and the questions that they still had to answer, that we weren't ready to stop there. And so we applied for and were successful in getting some more funding to extend our work. So in 2024, end of 2023, we were awarded £25,000 for this project here, Siúbhal a Chadach, that, if you don't know, is the Gaelic for travelling the shore or traversing the shore. The idea being that our conversations, particularly actually with Sabhal Mór Steig, the UHI campus on Slate on Skye, told us or shared with us how the kind of relationship that people have with beachcombing shorelines is so entrenched, and the materials have changed. But the practice of combing the beaches for useful pieces of debris, but also just clearing up bits of debris that are unsightly, is not something that's new. This idea that this is an enduring problem that mapped into our sort of 50 years of litter story, sorry, I did not mean to click through there, was quite important. And so, with the support of a few local groups, including the Scottish Science Federation, the Skye and Loughborough Environment Forum, we established some more formal connections, specifically with the Slate Community Trust, and then through some personal connections of mine with the community in Tarbert and Skipness on the Kintyre Peninsula. And with this project, we have funded local community-led survey work on Slate, on Skye, and in Kintyre. Some photos here of beach cleans and survey efforts from the Tarbert group in the bottom left. And I just want to flag here, so Tackle is actually an organisation now, a formal organisation that's been formed out of Tarbert and Skipness Community Trust as a result of the funding that we injected into their community initiative. Top left there is a really nice illustration by one of the members of the Slate Nature Group, Dan Milner, that really summarises or illustrates quite well the work that they are doing on Slate to monitor the same beach, where they've seen considerable reductions in the amount of litter accumulating by returning to the same beach every every quarter, cleaning it, monitoring it, and really appreciating a decrease in the amount of litter there. So I want to stress that this is we've injected funding into these communities, but we've left them to it. The funding that work that they've been doing is to a brief that we've set, but how they've actually undergone it, and we've left them to their own devices to design a method that works best for them. So it's sort of the information that we've gleaned from these survey periods, these 2 projects, has really gone into our understanding of, or the way that we've generated and analysed the data that we've collected over the past 2 years. And that's what I really want to focus today's talk on. And I want to stress before I do that, that the slides that follow are going to summarize some of these key findings from 2 years of beach surveying on Skye. The questions that these slides pose and go somewhere to answer would not have been asked at all if we hadn't actually engaged the community groups that have supported us. As a result of that, we've gone from taking a study that originally hoped to get some data on Skye that it could report, write a paper, and see what happened, to identifying a region that we consider to be a prime case study of scientists monitoring beach litter very poorly, and national and international legislation sort of missing out because of the data that is either being collected in a poor way or not being collected at all. As a result of this, we sort of refer to this landscape, this region, as a sentinel landscape for researchers and legislators to advance their understanding of both the natural and social environmental context of marine litter. And the only reason that all of this has been possible is because of the support that we've had from the community groups. And I think this really speaks to the quote that Fiona introduced at the start of the talk. So the first set of results that I'm going to introduce cover this really important statement, I suppose, that how we monitor matters. So we might have a gold standard method in the OSPAR protocol, but the way that it's implemented has a big bearing on the results that we find. Excuse me. To briefly summarize the figure on screen from our own data, each of these sets of matrices represents a beach surveyed, followed by the year. In 2023 or 2024, you'll see lettered columns at the top. Each of those letters corresponds to a different 10-meter wide transect. And then we've broken down the litter that we recorded by material. And the long and short of this figure is that if we found that every single 10-meter survey width was representative of all the other survey widths that were taken on the same beach at the same time, we wouldn't see any of these red or blue circles. So this element of variation in our survey locations on the same site and looking at smaller scale 10-meter wide beach transects has enabled us to highlight the variability of beach litter accumulations within the same site. And this is something that if we just stick rigidly to excuse me, surveying 100-meter stretch of shoreline, as the OSPAR protocol expects, we would not be able to tap into. This is a question, and all of these questions are ones that we didn't go in asking. We were asked if we could explore them by community groups, and we've been able to do that with the experimental design that they have helped us develop. Aligned to this, I've talked about this idea of extrapolating beach litter data to pieces of litter per 100 meters. And on this figure, excuse me, the key things you need to note are that every circle represents a survey undertaken in 2023, every triangle in 2024. And again, each survey, each circle or triangle is data collated from a single 10-meter transect. It's number of pieces of litter taken from that 10-meter transect and extrapolated to 100 meters. And you can see some considerable, and we've run the statistics on this, it is indeed significant variation in the amount of litter that you would assume is on a beach if you took one 10-meter transect and extrapolated it up. So one of the things we're now working to do is argue for national and international monitoring campaigns to reduce the width of beach that they report their data to enable consistency across beaches that, to enable the inclusion of beaches that only have the capability to survey less than 100 meters of shoreline, for example. If we can standardize down, it will increase the number of beach sites that are suitable for comparison between beach litter surveys. And then the other kind of key finding in this broader theme of how we monitor matters is what we actually record on our survey forms. So these figures here show a matrix of whether we look at the abundance of items depending on the material category, so that's the plastic, the glass, the rubber, the metal, etc., or whether we actually specifically characterize what we're finding in the beaches. So are we finding pieces of rope, pieces of net, bottle tops, etc. And I want you to focus first on this panel, these two figures on the right for abundance. What we see is that the differences between sites, so each of these coloured shaded shapes is a different site, spreads out when we start recording the specific items compared to material categories. What this tells us is that if we are accurately recording what it is we're finding on the beach, rather than just whether it's made of plastic, aluminium, glass, etc., we're able to pick out patterns in the types of items that are accumulating on different parts of shorelines. This obviously is really, really important when it comes to determining intervention points. If we just stick to materials, we're not necessarily going to be identifying as accurately the problematic types of litter on different beaches with different aspects, different industries, different social spaces in their vicinity. On the left, however, it gets perhaps a little bit more interesting because we see exactly the same patterns when we consider just recording the presence or absence of litter. In terms of survey efforts, this is really important because what this suggests, and we certainly need to do some more testing in this space, is that if we were to survey a heavily polluted beach and just record the first instance that we found a particular type of item, we would get statistically comparable data to if we recorded every single instance of that same item. This means that obviously we could save a lot more time if we just need to say whether or not an item is there or not, rather than count, as I have had my team doing, hundreds, if not thousands, of shotgun shells, for example. We also find that what we record matters when we look at the survey, the actual categories that we're presented with. So on the top here, you'll see a screenshot from those off-bar monitoring guidelines, and it shows a short length of cord, which it characterizes simply as string or cord. What we've got on the bottom, though, are photographs of the same sorts of pieces of cord that our engagement with community groups and community experts has quite confidently identified as net clippings, pieces of net that are from the repair and the maintenance of nets by fishers. Indeed, we have had community members tell us that they've sat in their lounge windows overlooking a pier and seen fishers mending their nets and chucking these pieces straight out to sea. So the key sort of, I suppose, take home here is that we need to take a very careful and critical look at how the current monitoring guidelines categorize litter. These have not necessarily been categorized with people who are interacting with this litter on a daily basis. And our experience is that had we used the guidelines, not just for this particular piece of litter, that are provided by OSPAR, we would have miscategorized lots of pieces of litter. And this is perhaps the most prevalent example of that. Aligned to this, sorry, there's a lag on my computer, I do apologize. There's a lot of litter types that are not being recorded. So here is a panel figure of types of litter that we regularly encountered in our surveys that there is not space for in that 2010 OSPAR monitoring guideline. We've been able to identify what these are with the help of the community support and partners that have been involved in this work. But were we to be filling in the traditional forms, a lot of these types of litter would just be grouped as other plastic. I really want to stress here that I'm super conscious that there are more local level monitoring guidelines and monitoring campaigns that do allow the inclusion of pieces of litter like this and that do recognize them. That they have been a great help in our own work. My focus here is thinking about, well, what's happening at the kind of the beyond Scotland, beyond the UK kind of level of marine litter monitoring. So what we don't record really, really does matter because, again, we cannot effectively intervene if we don't have accurate data about what we're finding. And as one of our previous graphs shows, recording the application is more important than recording just the material if we want to identify appropriate intervention points. So these figures are all taken from a manuscript that is currently in review, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But these are the data that we are getting ready to publish from our work. Before I talk about that, though, I also want to just flag another project that we've been involved in. So that's Isle of Skye. Isle of Skye is a project funded by the Royal Society, and the title stems from me struggling to explain myself, if I'm quite frank, to a peer who just said, "What would you do if you could do anything in the world?" And I said, "I'd take a skip of litter from Skye beaches and I'd put it in the Sainsbury's car park and empty it out and put little tags on all the litter to draw connections between the litter we're recovering in Skye and its consumption in the supermarket aisles." The perhaps most infamous or prime example of this would be things like equating aquaculture gear with Maui branded salmon in the fish aisle. So I applied for some funding to do this with this title, and I was awarded it, and I connected with Simon Riddle. So Simon Riddle is a wet plate collodion photographer based in Portree on Skye, and he's an amazingly talented guy. Wet plate collodion photography is a Victorian method of photography. So thinking about that kind of temporal interest in our work, the 50 years of litter angle, and then the Trefuarch Claddach angle as well, we found it really, really appropriate to use this historic technique of surveying, of taking photographs to connect and tell the story of changing materials and presenting the reality of this problem in the contemporary landscape. Simon was commissioned to take a series of photographs. These photographs are now all taken. I'm going to talk through each of them in turn in a minute, but I do just want to stress that we're hoping, we've been in conversation with an MSP about hosting this work in Holyrood. Unfortunately, we do have to wait until next year's elections before we know if they are going to be returned to Parliament and therefore able to host us. But our hope is that we can actually get these photographs in the corridors of power with the stories associated with them. And I'm going to talk through each photograph in turn. The first one, I'm really conscious that this photo makes me look like a pioneering explorer. It's not intended to in that way, but this photo we've titled Trefuarch Claddach because this is me on those shorelines, on that beach that Scott surveyed in 1972. A really poignant sight. And in the background as well, over my left shoulder, is Camasunary, which is one of the most polluted sites. This is where we found those 1,051 pieces of litter in 1 metre squared. This is, the purpose of this photo is to tell that story of us going back in time, retracing these footsteps, but really augmenting the work that was done in 1972 to put it in this broader environmental and social context. The second plate that Simon took, we've titled We. So this is some of my team. It is by no means all of my team. The reason that we've titled this plate We is because we really want to stress that this is a team effort, but that team effort is not just the research team. It is the team of community partners that have brought us together in this space to do the work that we have done. Third image I want to show you, we've called, excuse me, The Closer You Look. The Closer You Look is a close-up of one of my team surveying one of those quadrats, in this case a 50 by 50 centimetre quadrat, highlighting some of the common items of litter that we find on these beaches. This is perhaps my most favourite of all the photos. This photo I was quite keen to title You Can't Teach This. The reason for this title is this is my team. Obviously, this is quite staged, but we are undertaking a type of survey that we designed ourselves off the back of conversations with people who are undertaking these survey efforts. We sort of took on board a lot of the challenges, and we asked ourselves questions about how our scientific survey methods might be able to overcome some of them. This is just one of them, but the reason that I wanted to call it You Can't Teach This is because whilst this is a pretty standard survey methodology, our thoughts of how it could be applied in this context and our own analysis and evaluation over how suitable it might be for the people who are on the ground doing a lot of these surveys in their own time was very much guided by the kind of the softer research skills that we just aren't taught and that I think are not engaged with enough in the environmental space or environmental research space. The final photo of this series is called Bound and Laid to Waste, and it's quite a harrowing photo. You may have heard of the series of um, whales that were entangled in fishing gear in the first quarter of this year. One of those whales, a sperm whale, was washed up on the shores of Rasay, and this is unfortunately that individual. 132 meters of rope around its jaw. That's more than the length of a of a football pitch, and also 15 kilograms of plastic in its stomach. Really, really harrowing image, but sort of tells the story of the extreme consequences of this litter. And I really want to just stress as well. So Simon, in addition to being a photographer, is an environmental health officer. He was with the whale in a work capacity, supporting its recovery, its autopsy, and ultimately its burial, managing the site. So this was all done with all of the necessary permissions. This was not just Simon romping up there as a curious photographer. We did it with all of the respect that's needed for such a harrowing image. I really want to stress here that my interest in this is just because I'm absolutely in love with all of the diversity of creative practice that I've seen across the West Coast with all of the travels that I've done for work in this space, and really want to champion its space, its opportunity to tell stories and connect people who are not going to be privileged enough to go to these shorelines with the challenges, environmental challenges that I'm tackling. And Simon's medium and Simon's approach, I think, has really opened a lot of doors in that space. Associated with this and still sort of aligned to the Isle of Skye project, I am also undertaking some slightly tangential work, because Loughborough University is really fortunate. We have something called a DigiLabs, and these facilities include immersive virtual reality technologies. And so I was really lucky actually to be lent a 360 camera by the person who runs the DigiLab, so that I could create a digital space that can take people to these shorelines who might not be able to themselves. And I'm hoping that we have done a quick test of this. This is what I would just like to check. So hopefully you can see one of these 360 images on the screen now. And if I pan around, you can see some of the accumulations of litter. This is just at one site. I appreciate it is very laggy. There we go. Oh, and we can go between sites. So sorry, it's just flying through the world. So this is what Dr. Gary Burnett at Loughborough University has put together from my images. We can fly back into Camasunary and have a look at the litter here as well. And what I'm doing with my students in the first instance is going to be essentially surveying how effective this is as a communication method, as a tool for connecting people to the pollution in these on these shorelines, and thinking about potential action and intervention points. I'm using my students as guinea pigs very much, and then my hope is that we can explore how this can be expanded to research in kind of the wider community, in places like Loughborough, Nottingham, London, Glasgow, wherever. Okay, so what's actually happening now then? Well, we're currently funded by a network called the Ecological Citizens Network for a project called Community Anthropogenic Litter Monitoring with Ecological Citizen Researchers. The Ecological Citizens Network have awarded us £50,000. That's buying out my time, my colleagues' time, and local community time as well. So again, we're funding more projects. In fact, across all of our £90,000 of funding that we've secured so far, we're talking about £40,000 to £45,000 that are going to people on the ground working in Scotland, particularly on the West Coast in this space. What we are excuse me, asking with this project is for the surveys that we have, the lessons that we've learned about surveying marine litter have identified lots of different approaches to beach litter surveying that could be suitable and certainly could be better than the Loughborough approach. So with the community groups that we are engaging, particularly on Skye and Kintyre Peninsula as well, we are asking them to undertake really quite high resolution, detailed surveys of the beaches that they are working on. We're asking them to generate data which we can then analyze to compare the suitability of different survey techniques. But crucially, we are front loading this kind of methodological acceptance assessment so that we know what the social implications for people who are actually on the ground, or practical logistical implications for people on the ground undertaking this kind of work is. Because we don't want to say, well, this method will provide you with a more reliable quantification of marine litter without also assessing whether or not it's actually likely to be used by people who are doing a lot of this monitoring. The idea here is if we can work with these communities over the next 10 months, we can gather their experiences, we can learn from them. And then when we return to Skye in July 2026, we can do some more detailed assessments of the quantifiable differences between these survey techniques with that kind of social acceptance of the different techniques in mind. What we don't want to do is promote an alternative methodology without any kind of assessment as to whether or not it will be used by the people involved. And I won't go into too much detail about what these different methods are because that will take far too long. I also just want to flag that I said that we were in the process of publishing our work. We do have a paper manuscript ready, and we're undertaking a community peer review, by which I mean we've given the manuscript to the community partners that have supported us. They are providing us with reviewer feedback before we submit it to academic peer review. We want to make sure that the arguments we make, the conclusions we draw, fairly represent the issue before it goes into the kind of the scholarly world, because once it's in there, it's too late. So that's something that I'm quite excited about. So bringing the talk sort of to a close, I want to answer that original question that I posed. What does science need to learn specifically about marine litter monitoring? And when I was writing this slide, I realized that it doesn't necessarily need to be said to people who are on this call. I'm including it though because I want to reassure you that these are the messages that we're taking into our academic dissemination and policy dissemination of this work. So we can't comment on beach litter data that exists beyond Scotland's west coast. But what we can say with confidence is that Scotland's west coast cannot reliably be monitored with the existing methodologies that are available to it. And we want to tell the scientific community this. We also want to reflect more on the value and benefits that we've experienced from working with community researchers, because there's a wealth of literature that talks about the benefits of community integration into research for the communities it integrates. There's not as much that's talking about the benefits of doing this for the research community. So we want to do some really sort of important reflections on what we've got from working with communities for the scholarly reader or audience. We want to really champion the fact that understanding beach litter is a lot more than just counting pieces of rubbish on a beach, and that in the UK, we recognise that community efforts are under-resourced, undervalued, and overly relied on in this space. We're advocating for a need to agree on an alternative beach survey methodology for coastlines such as Skye's, but it's not a blank page. We want to champion the work that's already being done in this space by local communities so that we can build on stuff that we know is already in process and being deployed successfully, but is perhaps not being considered by people who are wanting monitoring done to inform legislation and policy. And so just to close, I want to flag again that this is a big team effort. These are some photographs of my team in the field. I'm just one person from that team. And of course, all of the people who and organisations that have supported us. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a start. And these are definitely people who we owe a lot of thanks to for this work. And with that, I will end. If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. And certainly for a Friday afternoon, you've challenged our brains there to take in that information. So yeah, thank you. I'll allow you to get a drink. You did really well getting through all that with your cough. Yeah, we're going to stop the recording just now, and then just open it up to questions or comments or